going to dive right in here. Chip and Friends, new episode with the one, the only Will Manso, sports director of WPLG, ABC affiliate in Miami, and host/reporter for the Miami Heat. So you can understand with those titles attached to his name, he's a very busy man, and he is kind enough to give us some time here on the podcast. Will, first of all, this looks to be that ultimate year for local sports for you. You've got the Heat hosting the 76ers right now, going into Game 2, up 1 in the Eastern Conference semifinals. The Panthers getting set to start their Stanley Cup playoff run against the Washington Capitals. And there's this little thing called Formula One that I hear is a pretty big deal in a small section of the world. I mean, how are you balancing this week out? Because it seems like just a giant cluster to navigate.
Yeah, I don't know yet, Chip, to be honest, because it just started. So, like, you see me now, I'm smiling, I'm happy. By Sunday night, I may not look like this. I'll be a little more exhausted, but I mean, we're kind of the center of the sports world, and it's my first time, in 23 years at Channel 10, so covering in South Florida sports for 23 years, I don't remember a time, and I don't think there has been a time where the Heat and Panthers have entered the playoffs as number one seed, expectations of winning a championship. There have been seasons, obviously, the Heat go in, that the Panthers make the playoffs, and the Panthers are one and done, though. You got to remember, the Panthers have only been won a series one time in their history, and that was the season that they went to the Stanley Cup Finals the year of the Rat. So you combine that with the fact that we have Formula One here in town for the first time in this huge race and worldwide appeal. I mean, all these drivers in town. This is the center of the sports universe for the entire week, and it's going to be wild.
It really is. And you're in a unique position of covering all of that. Not only is just the local sports director for the ABC affiliate, but then also having your responsibilities to the Miami Heat. How do you walk that tightrope right now? How is that balancing act going in the moment, just a day into the week?
Well, I always tell people that, it doesn't feel like work, right? If you're having fun and you love what you do. And I know that that's an old cliche, but it's true. And like during the season, it's more exhausting during the season when you do, 82 Heat games, and I cover probably about, I would say 60 of them, 62 of them or so. So it's exhausting. It gets tiring. But now in the playoffs, it doesn't feel like work. Like we covered the first round. I did some Heat work then. When you're going out on the court and interviewing Tyler Hero after a big playoff win, and the emotion of the arena going crazy, and you're on the center court, and here's, what he has to say or whatever Heat player, like that doesn't feel like work. It's not exactly exhausting. I don't want to make it seem like, oh my God, my job is so tough. It's hard to balance in the sense like this week, for instance, we had the Heat Monday, the Panthers Tuesday, the Heat Wednesday, the Panthers Thursday, the Heat Friday, Panthers Saturday, the Heat Sunday, Friday through Sunday, F1. Next couple of days, I'll be doing F1 stuff, going out to try to do driver interviews at different locations. Like, again, it sounds crazy, right? But if you really think about it, considering that I'm just a sports fan and a kid at heart who gets to see all this stuff, it's not as hard as you would think. It's just, maybe sleep 5 hours and then go back at it the next day.
Again, Will Manso, sports director of WPLG, ABC affiliate in Miami, host and reporter for the Miami Heat. And the way our relationship works, Will, is I went to University of Miami. I interned at WPLG. You are one of my mentors. I have a ranking. I'm not going to reveal it for transparency's sake. But that was right around the time, 2013, 2014 was around the time I was interning for WPLG. And that was around the time that you joined the Miami Heat with that host reporter mantra. And I've noticed across the East Coast that a lot of broadcasters are starting to take on more responsibilities aside from their local news responsibilities. Have you noticed that trend? And what about getting ahead of the curve has helped you establish yourself in the community, not just for ABC, but also within the team, one of a popular team, not just in Miami, but in the NBA?
Well, I got lucky too, because Chip, as you mentioned, when you were finishing your internship, I got that job, and it was right near the end of the Big Three era. So I got to cover the Big Three for a year or two as a member of the broadcast team, and then since then, the rebuild, and then getting back to the finals and all the excitement of that, and then what they've become now. But to answer your question, I mean, it's just the way the roles have changed. Like in the old days, a broadcaster, a local anchor, which is, I'm proud to say I'm a local anchor. It's okay to say, is, that was like your job, right? You were on TV and Monday through Friday, and you're on the 6 o'clock news and the 11 o'clock news, but times have changed. It's expanded to the point where, look what we're doing here in a podcast, and look what we do with social media every day, communicating with fans, fellow fans, not just fans of your work, but fans of the teams you cover, more importantly. The ability to have that avenue to discuss sports at all times has changed our jobs, which means in turn, we have to change the way we see things, which means, you got to do more work. You got to cover more. You got to do more. And so when that opportunity came up, it sounded crazy, but like you said, now I see roles like that all over the place. And not that I was one of the first, but I think when I started doing it, you saw less of it, where now it's the norm. Back then, people would be like, wow, that's great. How do you do it? That's kind of weird. Now it's like you see it all over the country. If somebody's covering a team in Milwaukee locally, they may work for the Bucks, or they may work for the Brewers, or whatever the case may be, because I think people in town trust an opinion and the voice of someone who knows the town, who's been in that town. I'm not to say I'm always right, because I'm not, and I've certainly had some bad takes on local teams, but I cover them with the eyes through the vision of I've been here 20 plus years. I know what this market is like, and I think people appreciate that voice and that kind of ability to showcase their teams through your stories. So I think that's what's changed a lot in the last 10 years or so, and it's only going to keep changing because ways to communicate keep expanding.
That's exactly what I saw when I was in Washington, D.C. for that year. Perfect example of that, JP Finley, who was on the Washington Commanders beat for NBC Sports Washington, then started his podcast. Now he's doing work for NBC4 and also a talk show host for 106.7 The Fan. You guys have your podcast. I don't remember the name of it right off the top of my head, but you do with Clay
Miami
Ferraro.
Sports Pod. We keep it simple. Miami Sports Pod. It's all Miami sports. Yeah.
Quintessential Miami Sports Pod. So that really is the truth, man. And even here in Norfolk, I'm learning that ODU football is kind of the driver around here, but having that balance of being able to be in different mediums is something that I tell a lot of young journalists out there right now. It's like, what can I be doing? Just do a little bit of everything. You don't know where it's going to help you in the future. Now, I'd be remiss for some in my audience not to spend some time on Formula One, as you will be covering the inaugural Miami Grand Prix. And I saw Haas's Instagram post. It looked like Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and I just wanted it right into my body. Excitement for the sport in the U.S. is rocketing to Mars. So you actually got the opportunity to see and cover it in the historic Imola Grand Prix. Right off the bat, how would you compare seeing a classic Formula One experience at the hallowed ground of Emilia-Romagna to what you expect to see when the lights go out at Hard Rock Stadium?
I mean, it's different, obviously. And look, I talked to a lot of people there in Imola and a lot of Italian fans and mostly Ferrari fans, but a lot of fans in that region who love F1. And there were people from all over Europe mainly that were there. I met people from Belgium, from Germany, from all over, from London and Paris. And just you meet all these different people, and they all have the same thing, a passion for Formula One. And what makes Formula One so special is that history. And Imola is part of that because of that, like you said, that historic course. And people understand what that track means and what that race means on the schedule for Formula One. Now you come over here to South Florida, it's a whole different animal. This is Formula One is something that while there are many Formula One fans in South Florida, it's been that way for a long time. Now having this race and the glitz and the glamour and the hype, it is very Monaco-esque, I guess, if you could say. And then kind of like a Monaco meets Austin, right? Where Austin, as being one of the newer circuit schedule on the schedule for F1, is that U.S. stop and the young and the hip and the fun, and Monaco's the historic, scenic, everybody loves the party and by the water. I think Miami is kind of a mesh of both, where you get the youth and the excitement and the new market for F1, but at the same time you get the glitz and the glamour. You're not going to have the history. It's a brand new course, and some people there, not that they were frowning upon it, but they were like, oh, it's just a course in a parking lot, And I tell people this. You may think it's a course in a parking lot. Yeah, in theory, the Hard Rock Stadium and the Dolphins and that whole team took over that parking lot, but they turned it into a world-class track. And when you go there and you see it with your own eyes, it is just, you would never imagine that you were around the stadium in a parking lot in Miami Gardens, Florida. It's just not what they've done. So it's a credit to them. But I think people understand that you're not going to have the history. You're not going to have the story in the background, but you are going to have the cars, and you're going to have the fun, and you're going to have the glitz, and you're going to have the scenery and the scene and be seen and the celebrities. And that's what Miami's about. So it's a perfect fit.
It certainly feels, though, that Miami's kind of that next step in the U.S.'s evolution of adopting Formula One into the popularity landscape. With Austin, a lot of the drivers have gone on record saying they love going to Austin and racing on that course. And now there's excitement for Miami, obviously, with the celebrity factor, the glitz and glamour you alluded to, and adding Las Vegas to the calendar next year. So my next question is, do the simulators do enough justice for what it feels like to drive an F1 car? Because as I understand it, based on your social media, you got a chance to go behind the wheel of a simulator and see what it feels like to drive an F1 car.
Well, number one is I went to the Ferrari Museum, okay, in Maranello, and the gentleman there who'd been there for 20 years told me that drivers go through there and test the simulators, and they say it is a very accurate representation. It's obviously not going to be exact, but it's a very accurate representation of what it feels like to drive these tracks. And the cool thing is you pick the course. In this case, I picked Imola because I was there, and you get in this. You're a tall guy, and I'm 6'2", and I
Yeah.
get in this little thing. I think, oh my god, how do drivers do this for 2 hours going 200 plus miles an hour?
And they're
That's the
not just
first thing.
sitting, they're like laying
No, no.
back in the seat.
Yes.
It's like a
And that's the
weird
thing,
laying angle.
and your feet their feet are going up a little. So you're, like you said, you're laying back. It's almost like you're in a perfect world. Yeah, it's resting, but you're in this cramped space driving those high speeds. So then you start driving, and that's where it gets really complicated because you're shifting and you're stopping and you're seeing the turns, and it's funny because anybody who's been on a ride at Disney or something, and you see these 3D rides where it makes you feel like you're really moving, right? Well,
Yeah.
I felt like I was really in a race car, and obviously I'm not. But visually in your mind, I was getting dizzy. I was like, this is too much. Like it was a 10-minute ride, and at 7 minutes I crashed. And I told the guy, I'm like, okay, I've had enough. I've done enough. So to answer your question, you get a pretty good feel of what it might be like to go 200 miles per hour inside of a Formula One car. It's not going to be
Including
accurate.
those G's to the neck. Do you get that a little bit?
You felt it. Like obviously it's going to be a little bit more in real life, but what you feel and what you see, you really are kind of like in that world for that moment, and it's pretty cool. But at the same time, it teaches you of how hard that sport is, how hard it is to drive 200 plus miles per hour for 2 hours over these tight turns and tracks, with these drivers on top of you. It's an incredible skill. These guys are incredible athletes and drivers, and I would not want to be in that car in a real race. I'll put it that way.
And before we get back to talking about your career and how we can help these young journalists figure out how they make it into the business, you mentioned the glitz, the glamour, being in that Formula One simulator. What are you keeping tabs on? Who are you keeping tabs on for the Miami Grand Prix? And what should viewers keep tabs on for this weekend coming up?
Well, I think, the storylines, it's funny because I've followed Formula One over the years as far as like a casual fan. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Obviously, Michael Schumacher when he was dominating, and, you look at the history, but I wasn't up until maybe 2 months ago, a Formula One fan who every race was on my calendar. I had to watch every race. I had to get up early or whatever the case may be, depending on where the races are. Now, in learning about these shows, knowing that Formula One come to Miami, I've kind of become a fan, like where I consider myself a Formula One fan. Like last night I was in the Heat game and I was kind of like, hey man, that's George Russell. Like he was walking by me down by the court. I'm like, where 2 months ago, be like, oh, that's George Russell, the Formula One race. I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah, whatever. Where now it's like I saw Verstappen with a Heat jersey. Like they give him a Heat. Like these things are cool to me. So when I look at the star power, I think that's part of it. When I was in Italy, went to the news conference, I walked in and I don't get starstruck much, if at all, but I looked and there was like Lewis Hamilton and Verstappen and Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. And I'm like, wow, look, going down the list of these guys that I see driving 200 miles per hour. So I think the storyline is, how does Ferrari rebound after a tough week in Imola? Ferrari has done so well this year, and all of a sudden they have a setback in Imola where, Sainz goes out in the first turn. Leclerc tries to pass late, ends up, not placing, falling into sixth. I think those are storylines too. And, how Red Bull continues their success. I mean, these are all things. Can Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes figure things out? Are they going to start turning things around? I mean,
porpoising with the Dolphin Stadium, how appropriate.
Yeah. What's going to happen? I think those are the storylines that as a fan now of F1, I look forward to seeing. But I think is when I step back and just forget about just the fan part of it, it's just how cool it's going to be to have an event like that in my town and my community and seeing that excitement. I can't wait to see the amount of energy and passion and love for the sport that we're going to see those 3 days.
I'm not a son of Miami like you are, but I like to call myself a proud, once lived in Miami.
We claim you. We claim you. You're a Kane. We claim you.
Yes. All right. I'll take it. And all of that, what you said, excites me as well. Plus, if Daniel Ricciardo wins for McLaren, he is going to swan dive into the air quotes water.
Yeah, be careful with that water. That's not real water. So you got
to air quote. Emphasis on the air quotes.
Be careful, Daniel. I like Daniel Ricciardo, by the way. I'm a fan as well.
Yes, and he loves the U.S. national anthem. It's his favorite in the world. All right, getting back to the world in broadcasting, only your true friends and family know your origins in the business, myself included. So literally piecing together tape for your reel to then be
Mhm.
accepted and go to Missoula, Montana. Was that
Yeah.
the perfect embodiment of a fish out of water experience to
Mhm.
start out? And being a movie buff, were you a regular at the Wilma Theater in downtown Missoula?
I was not. I was not a regular because back then. Okay, so let me start from the beginning. I get the job, and it was like everybody tells you you have to start small, right? But then I'm thinking to
Mhm.
myself, I mean, did they have to be Missoula, Montana? Does it have to be that small? And, because I knew nothing about Montana. And I'm a kid who grew up in South Florida. My parents were living in West Palm Beach at the time. I went to the University of Miami. My parents are Cuban, so it's a Cuban background, Hispanic background, very close knit family from South Florida. And then boom, I'm shipped off to Missoula, Montana, the other
Culture
side of the
shock.
world for me. Yeah, the culture shock you get there. And all I wanted to do the first few months I was there was just get out, right? That's all, work hard so I can get out of here. Then a few months later, as time went on, I started really embracing of like, hey, I'm a grown man now. I'm not a kid anymore. I can't be babied back home. I need to grow up. And Missoula was a perfect place. It's a beautiful place. The people are wonderful. The nature goes without saying is incredible. The cold is real and the snow is real. It's definitely a little desolate in the winter, but I grew to love it so much that years later I took my kids there. We took a summer vacation pre-pandemic where I spent 12 days in Missoula and just north into Kalispell and Whitefish,
Yeah.
where we rented a cabin and stayed out there. And to this day, the kids still love it. They still talk about it. Like, hey, Daddy, can we go back to Montana one day? Like, that's how much they loved it. I would have never guessed that, though, when I got that job, that, 25 years later, I'd be thinking with fondness of Missoula. But that's just part of growing up. When people say you got to start small, you do, and you don't see it at that moment. And then years later, you learn how vital that experience was to making you the person and the professional that you are 25 years later, whatever the time may be. So I look back, it's got a soft spot in my heart. I love Missoula, Montana, and that experience that I had out of college.
Yeah, it's something that has been a running theme throughout the podcast when I talk to fellow broadcasters, my friends, is that unlike me, I started in my hometown of Richmond, like lucky draw. A lot of them started
Very
in a
lucky.
small market and figured it out from there. So, what would you tell aspiring journalists about where they start for that first job, whether it's
Mhm.
small or medium, and just finding that right feel for you?
I think the number one piece of advice is don't be picky. Just take the opportunities that come. And if you want to be on air and you want to have that opportunity, or whether you want to be a producer or whatever, we talked earlier about the roles changing. The reality is, everybody now is a multimedia journalist. Everybody now, even now, all these years later, I've been at Channel 10 for, like I said, 23 years. I've been the sports director, whatever you want to call it, for the last
Hmm.
decade, but that means nothing. That's just the title. The reality is you are a multimedia journalist. Like this thing here, this phone that I have,
Yeah.
it's constantly getting video, and I'm constantly shooting. And if I have to do an interview with this video, I'll do an interview with this video, and I get
Yeah.
pictures, telling stories, constantly doing things like this with Channel 10 or with others. The job of a journalist is not just be on TV or just produce or just write. You have to be able to do it all. So when you think of starting small in whatever market that is, like you said, whether it's Richmond or Missoula or anything in between, is you just got to have the opportunity to do it all. Embrace that, enjoy it, know that it will make you better, because you can't be too picky. You can't say no. If I would have said no to Missoula because I'm like, oh, no, I'm not going to Montana. What am I going to do over there? I'm a kid from Miami. I can do better. Maybe that call never comes. And maybe 3 months later, I'm like, you know what, Dad, I'm going to go work with you. My dad owned a mechanic shop. I said, maybe I'll go work with you for a little bit just to make a little extra money and help out. And then all of a sudden, I'm the manager of my dad's mechanic shop. And then I'm making a little money. And then I'm like, nobody's calling. And then guess what? I graduated from the University of Miami, and I never got in the business because I got comfortable doing something else, and I never took that chance, right?
Hmm.
So you have to, at some point, take that chance. When that opportunity presents itself, it may never come again. So you take it, you run with it, you do everything you can, and then if everything works out, you work hard, it will work out for you in the end.
We're with Will Manso, sports director, WPLG, ABC affiliate in Miami, host and reporter for the Miami Heat. And I love what you said there, because I'm using my cell phone all the time now. Right now, I'm photojournalist, MMJ. Doesn't matter. Like, you use this phone more than you would realize. And I edit on
Yeah.
my phone. Like, I've got
Oh yeah,
Adobe Premiere Rush. Yeah.
iMovie during the pandemic. I was working here from home, and everything I would edit, my packages, my stories that would air on the news, I edit on iMovie on my phone.
Yeah. Do not be discouraged. If you don't have a fancy camera, you don't have a fancy set, guess
No,
what? We're in our apartments right now with cameras on our laptops recording a podcast right now.
looks
So
just
don't
fine.
be
Yeah.
afraid to go out there and just shoot something with your phone. You never know what it's going to do,
Mhm.
especially in college, even in high school. Start
Yeah.
when you feel like you're ready
I
to go.
wish, by the way, I wish I had this at Are you kidding me? All the
Oh
trouble
my
would have saved me
gosh.
from telling stories to be able to
Oh,
get HD quality video and audio, set up little mics, put on your AirPods. I mean, this is perfect. I mean,
yeah.
you have no excuse as a young journalist to not get content. It's out there and you have the ability to get it not too expensive and do it every day.
A big part of local journalism and broadcasting is being a pillar of the community. For you, when you came back to South Florida, it was pretty easy. You were a local, you knew the area, but you had to build up that trust. It wasn't just you showed up on set and was like, I'm Will Manso, I'm from Miami. How do you build that trust and become that pillar? For you, it lasted 23 years of getting to that point where now you just like everyone knows who you are. But for the local journalist at, say, a media market that maybe has a 3-year contract, what is that process of trying to become that pillar of that community that people can trust, whether it's on TV, writing,
Yeah.
social media, on your phone, things like that?
It obviously starts with being the best you can on air. You want people to respect the work you do, see that you care about the community, see that you care about enough about the teams that you learn about the teams. Because you start in a new place, Missoula, for example. I knew nothing about Missoula. I knew nothing about the teams. I knew nothing about their history. You need to come in with the mindset that you've got to learn that. You can't fake it. You can't act like, oh, I've known about this community my whole life and I'm an expert, because they're going to see right through it. But step one is to at least engage in that, to learn that, see that you care and you're trying. Step two then is to try to, as you work, and that's the priority of being, a good journalist in the community and telling stories that need to be heard and that are important to the community. I think that's where you need to send plan B is, you need to be active in the community. You need to be around local charities, local events, heart walks, whatever it may be, go to those things. Even if you're not emceeing it, go to those things and things that are with the station. As the years go on, sometimes you'll get invited to MC. Hey, we want, the station's a sponsor. They want you to come along. That's great, but it's not just that. It takes more than that. I think engaging with people in the community and fans and knowing that you're one of them. Like, you don't want to be like, to this day, there are people that even after all these years have, oh yeah, hey, you're the guy from channel 7, right? Channel 10. It's fine. It's okay. Like, you can't expect everybody's going to know everything you do, but engage with them. And when they ask you a question about the Heat, like when people come up to me and talk about the Heat, 9 times out of 10, I'm not that busy that I can sit there and talk. There are times we're on a rush. I got to go, hey, I'm so sorry. I have to go do my live shot or whatever.
Right.
But I think they want to see that you're just one of them, because in the end, you are just one of them. I mean, who are we? The only difference between me and people and other people in South Florida that are Heat fans or Marlins fans is that I get to go on TV a couple times a day and talk about that. But in the end, we're all just fans who love sports and love our community. So I think it's step one is learn the community. Step two is engage in that community. Step three is show that you're just one of them in that community. And I think over the time, that builds that relationship with people.
And to wrap up this recording with a bow on top, all of your experience from letting a goofy intern like me do cartwheels in the background of your live shot with Dwayne Wade doing it for LeBron James. I'll never forget that moment. Sliding down the Dolphins' new slide in their training facility for a story, to having a heartfelt conversation with the legendary Don Shula before his passing. What is your secret contra code to never losing yourself and presenting an authentic product, an image that young journalists can put to good use in their own way?
I mean, I think honestly, Chip, it's just never. And this is what I loved about you. And I don't just say this because we're doing a podcast. Is that I remember when you were trying to get a job and you were starting that process of putting your reel. And I remember David Lang, a producer at our station, who I know has worked with you through the years as well. You've kept in contact with. And we both said the same thing. We looked at your reel and he said, Chip's got to be Chip, right? You got to be you. If you try to be somebody else, like you had the bow tie and you would have fun, you would do silly things. And that was you. It wasn't forced. And you have to do that. You have to be you, because people will see right through. If you're inauthentic, if you try to be something else that you're not, people will see through it. It looks cheesy. So the key for me is I never take myself too seriously. Like, I'm no better than anyone. I think I'm very good at my job because I love my job and I've been doing it a long time, but I still look for ways to improve. So the way you stay doing this is always understand that you can get better. Always understand that you're no better than anyone. I mean, you're just a normal person, again, who has a platform to work on TV or radio, podcast, whatever it may be, but it's just that. So I've never taken myself too seriously. I've always been myself. And the person you see here on a podcast or on TV is the same person you're going to see if I'm out at a bar having a drink. Like, I'm not going to change and be like, I'm some sourpuss when I'm away and then I'm a happy-go-lucky guy who loves everything when I'm on TV. No, I'm the same person. I think that's the key. And I think that's why you've had success and why you keep doing what you're doing. And other interns, former interns, or people that either I mentored or that I saw when they were younger and seemed to come up, I've noticed the same thing. They've stayed true to themselves and understand that look, we're having fun, man. I'm getting paid to talk sports. I'm going to be 50 years old in 3 years. I'm 47 years old. I've been doing this over half my life. I know that I'm pretty lucky. So I can't, if I ever take myself too seriously, that's when I need to quit.
He has certainly done well. You can see the Emmys in the background if you're watching this on YouTube. He is Will Manso, sports director of WPLG, ABC affiliate in Miami, Florida, host reporter for the Miami Heat. Will, if you got anything to plug, go for it, buddy.
Nothing to plug, man. Just keep following Chip. I got nothing. In South Florida, I appreciate everybody who watches the Heat coverage, Channel 10, whatever it may be. But yeah, keep doing your thing, Chip. It's fun to watch you grow and do things like this and all the other stops you've made. So keep it going.
You as well, man. Always love following your career. And tell David and Clay I say hello. To the listeners and viewers that have stuck around for this long, we appreciate you. And the next round is on me. Cheers, everybody.